Let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times, to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times, so all can build. Let's shine, yeah.
So let's talk about, now we're going to move back into the United States, and we're going to talk about something that is more, culturally political, and that's the Essence Festival. The Essence Festival has been a cultural mainstay for 25 years, maybe even more.
More, yeah,
right?
30 years.
30 years, right? So it has a cultural mainstay. So for those of you who are not aware of what the Essence Festival is, especially for those of you who are listening around the world, what's up, y'all? I know we do have a following around the world. Essence Festival was started by magazine, the editor-in-chief, I think her name was Susan, I forgot her name, Susan something. So there was a very popular magazine that was built and centered around women's fashion, Black women's fashion, beauty, aesthetics, and politics, called Essence Magazine. Out of Essence Magazine, something called the Essence Festival was created. The Essence Festival is a festival that was centered on celebrating the rich, vibrant culture of Black folk in America and propping up Black women in the meantime. It is a festival that historically has taken place in New Orleans, with the exception of after Hurricane Katrina. It was in Houston. And it got so much criticism that they had to find a way, make a way to put it back in New Orleans ASAP. Well, Essence Festival, the magazine, the editor, I forgot her name, Susan, left. Essence Magazine was sold. I want to say to a white company first, or was it sold to?
It was sold to that Black Nigerian.
So was it sold to a white company and then they sold it to the Nigerian, or it went straight to? Okay, so Essence Fest was sold to, his name is Richelieu. That's his last name. And he's not Nigerian. He's actually, maybe he's part Nigerian, but I think he's like Sierra Leonean, some West African, or Cameroonian or Sierra Leonean. So who Richelieu is, Richelieu owned Shea Moisture. So Richelieu sold Shea Moisture, and from those proceeds purchased Essence Magazine. And in that purchase packet also bought the Essence Festival, because those are two entities really. But there would not be an Essence Festival without an Essence Magazine. So they both fed each other. So for the last 3 years or 4 years, it has been under this new ownership. And recently, and every year there has been concerns about how the Essence Fest is carried out. In the tradition of the Essence Fest, and with the last 2 years, we're talking about with the consideration of Black American culture. And recently it came out that the company owed over $400,000 from vendors from the 2025 Essence Fest, which was, from a lot of the reports, was poorly put together for a whole bunch of reasons. And is over $400,000 in debt of paying for the convention center and whatever venues for 2026. So a lot of people are projecting that there probably will not be an Essence Festival in 2026. And they are talking about a lot of the issues that have popped up and have emerged as a result of that. So I want us to talk about the Essence. First of all, what did the Essence Festival, have you all ever gone to the Essence Festival? And what does something like that mean to you?
So first, so a couple of things. Susan Taylor was who we're talking about. Susan Taylor, the Essence Fest was started in 1995, right? And you are correct that Richelieu, last name Dennis, is actually Liberian, and comes from this tradition of African Americans who left the United States, then to create the country of Liberia, which is why their flag, the Liberian flag, has the same colors as the United States. So I want to first clear that up. Second, as far as attending Essence Fest, it is crazy because I have on numerous occasions put my mind towards I was going to go, especially once I moved to South Louisiana in the Baton Rouge area. I moved during 20, so of course Essence Fest didn't happen in 20. And I think really from that point on, how Essence Fest happened after 20 has been under heavy consternation, or there's been lots of conversation about how it was done or how it came back after COVID. I do know a lot of vendors though who participate in Essence Fest, especially smaller companies or smaller Black businesses. And Essence Fest in many ways is almost like tax season, right, for an accountant, right? They're waiting on Essence Fest because that's where they have a bulk of their sales. And so much so that they and protests in many ways stopped them from vendors setting up outside of the Superdome to protect their businesses that were happening and the vendor fees they were paying to be inside of the Superdome. And so Essence Fest is a huge deal. It is all everybody in South Louisiana is talking about right now, concerning what is going to be done this year, especially after last year, not only the debt that was incurred, but also the lack of timing. So the timing was off considerably. So artists weren't coming on stage until like 1 a.m. And I'm not just talking about Lauryn Hill, right? I'm talking about other folks who are known to be on time and then were bumped during the festival. So it's all anybody can talk about in South Louisiana. And it's actually causing a lot of heightened anxiety, especially from Black vendors who are dependent on that from an economic standpoint, from the level of tourism it provides. Let me also say that the city's new mayor is not helping in this, in sorting some of this out, because when we're talking about vendors being paid, some of the vendor agreements are based upon the city, and the transition of Mayor Cantrell not being able to ensure that the bills of the city were responsible for getting paid before she left office as mayor. So I want to also speak to, right, and this is not caping up for one person or one administration or the other, but to say that when Cantrell was mayor, that was one of the biggest things that she ensured, was making sure that those vendors that were supposed to be paid from the city side were being paid, because people have to remember that the vendors that provide coverage for Essence Fest, there's state outliers that are responsible, and then there's city outliers, and that the state has not held up its end of the bargain. And now the city, in many ways, is trying to figure out how they're going to hold up their end of the bargain. But Mayor Cantrell was a huge broker in making sure the city and the state held up to their end of the bargain for those vendors.
Dang.
Yes, and another thing I wanted to touch on, I know they said one of the reasons that they were having issues with the last Essence Fest, a lot of the vendors and people that they used were the local guys who knew how to run things, and they stopped using a lot of the local people. Excuse me, and that came into play. Excuse me, that came into play in regards to run of show. Like you said, people getting on late because the people that they hired didn't know. It's not just running the show, but you have to know the layout of the city. Like you have to know, like, performing in New Orleans is very difficult because the streets are very narrow. So sometimes tour buses can't get down the street. So if you don't know that, like little things like this will mess up your whole event. If you don't know, there's certain streets your tour bus is not going to go down. So there's only certain routes that you can take to get to the venues. If you hire somebody who's not local and they don't know that, and they'll go through maps, a mess is happening. So it's logistical errors like that happen by not using the original local vendors that they had used to run the show for the 25 years before. Somebody came in and tried to get it on the cheap. They came in, tried to bring their people in. They came in and changed up the whole game. And that's what led to the detriment of these last couple Essence Fests.
Dame, even with the hotels, right? Like if we get into it even about hotels. So this is the next thing when we talk about logistics, Kaia, to Dame's point, there are certain hotels that allow you to park your bus, right? So bus parking, what artists are at what hotels, what artists don't get along, so you can't put them at the same hotel. Like all of these, like all of those, like Dame says, the last 2 years, Dennis phased out a lot of the locals, right, from running pieces of it. So it turned into a logistical nightmare. Like and on top of it, having too many Essence sponsored events that were outside the radius, right, of the Superdome. So when you start, and this in many ways was a push to try to incorporate businesses, as we know, Black businesses that are not necessarily in the corridor. But when you do that from a logistical standpoint in trying to patron this Black business, what you're also doing is creating a logistical nightmare. If you have an event on the East Bank, right, or the West Bank, right, that's supposed to be officially a part of it, low attendance, et cetera, et cetera. So logistics have made it a nightmare on top of it. But like Dame said, it's a lot of infusion. And this is the thing that we're not really talking about. It's the infusion of Africans, right, that are not African Americans, right? So this intra Blackness argument that happens when you're starting to then infuse I'm not talking about just just locals. I'm also talking about non-Black Americans inside of the information structure or the logistic structure, the chain, making decisions that do not understand the nuances of Black American culture and how those nuances of Black American culture are often different, right, than the nuances of African different cultures that play into, and I'll give you an example of one. The whole VIP thing that played out last year, as far as them having badges in particular areas, right? This idea of getting rid of that, right, or not tiering it from a financial standpoint. And I hate to say this, bougie Negroes don't want to do Essence Fest with all the regular locals. They want to do Essence Fest with their design crew, and they want to be able to pay for that exclusivity. By removing that as a factor, or removing that tiered VIP access last year, or not keeping that space clean, right, and who's in there and who's not, created lots of discontentment, because a lot of people that paid for that privilege felt like, well, what did I really get for that money that I paid?
I also want to remark, because y'all been to it. We at Black Farmers Index, we do an event in New Orleans, and we second year, and we've seen an extreme increase in the people who attend. You can't do any New Orleans event without New Orleanians, right? And you just can't. Even you cannot, because they will not participate. That's another thing as well. So there are logistics, definitely, because of the way the streets, because we're talking about New Orleans is, for all intents and purposes, like old Latin America, right? So like if you go to New Orleans, you think you might be in San Juan, you might be somewhere in Cuba, right? So but also where the festival is held, there's a lot of one-way streets. So you've got to have somebody who knows how to navigate those one-way streets that GPS is not going to be on GPS, right?
Or knowing knowing what streets that they're likely to shut down.
Exactly. Right? And I was about to say that. And if you are not including the local folk and you're trying to get through a street, they will create a blockade that's not even official. So they will make it difficult for you to do that. But if you work with them, they will give you the keys to the kingdom, but you got to work with them. I think that's important to say. So, but this is the thing. This is how everybody else operates. If you don't include Italians, you're not going to have anything in a little Italy in the US.
Right.
If you don't include Africans, I cannot go to Liberia, and I cannot go to Nigeria. Nigeria's places I've been, and expect that I can just walk in, dictate how a festival has been run by Nigerians previous, and change the complexion, the texture, the timing. I think even the whole thing of timing is more of something, because I used to be thick in the reggae clubs, and I used to go to a lot of African festivals. Lateness is baked into how a lot of these festivals go, because they may have access to the venue to the wee hours of the morning, but that's not how New Orleans operates, because you have to factor in who's going to pay police officers for their overtime. So there are so many different things that I think that the new owners, right, Richelieu Dennis and the people that he brought in didn't factor in. And I think that, in my opinion, it at least reads an entitlement, the miseducation definitely, but an entitlement and thinking about what Black people are and who Black people are. I think that there was this play when they came in and they said that they would honor these traditions, but in the back end, there was no honor in the back end. It was, we're going to come in and we're going to take over. This is some things I also saw that happened. One thing I want to point out, I think this was 2 years ago or maybe 3, when Dennis came in, right? They actually filed lawsuits against businesses that said that they were with the Essence Festival. And one of the businesses that they filed a lawsuit against was a local book store called Baldwin and Company. If you look it up, Baldwin and Company is very much about literacy in the Black community. They have, they highlight Black, if not only Black authors in it, but they are a very loved, growing institution in New Orleans. And here comes the Essence Festival suing them because they said on their flyer, this is an Essence Festival event. And it got real ugly. It got very, very, very ugly, in that. I don't know if the Essence Festival issued an apology, but they definitely dropped any type of legal charges. That was a serious slap in the face. Last year, but this is to me, it doesn't read as, oh, I don't know, I'm doing this because I'm misinformed. To me, it's a direct attack. That's how it reads. So it even became more so last year when you had Target as one of your main sponsors. We boycotting Target. Why do you have Target as your main sponsor, right? And what people were saying is that where Target was, there weren't a lot of people, right? So now definitely you really don't give a fuck about Black Americans and trying to articulate how Target has participated in undermining Black businesses. Then you had these African influencers that are coming in, never been to Essence Festival, never been into New Orleans or anything like that, and now saying things like, well, Black American culture is African anyway, so we're bringing you the real authentic Black culture because we're African. My God. Yeah. Okay. Right. So that's another slap in the face. And as you all pointed out, directing the resources to these individuals and to these companies. This is what was told to me as well. And the Essence Festival is at this time, it has made, I know, $1 billion since it has been in existence. Right. So this is something that generates a lot of money. And from what I was told by a very credible source, that what's his name? Richelieu Dennis has been redirecting Essence money to events in Nigeria. So that's why people think that he's Nigerian, that he's been putting on. So he took the template of the Essence Festival and the resources and took it to Africa. Right. So which is, how you sending money back home, but like you sending the whole template home. So these are things that are coming up. And then as well, also there was an influencer or some woman who began to mock. Then there was a mocking of Black American culture. There was a woman who was South African who was part of promoting the Essence Festival, began to mock the Zulu parade. One thing you ain't gonna do is mock New Orleans culture, like Louisiana culture, and had a video. I saw the video. In the video, she said, this is the Zulu parade. And she was dressed as like an ancient mime or mammy, like a slave. And she had pieces of cotton and was throwing the cotton out, right? She said, that's the Zulu parade.
And let me tell you why, like, Zulu is such that in particular is such inflammatory, because what people don't understand is Zulu is the mocking of white people. And not only is Zulu the mocking of white people, Zulu is the first Black parade that was ever allowed to roll on Mardi Gras Day. Every other parade or every other crew, let me be very technical here, every other crew, Zulu is the very first. That's why it runs on Mardi Gras Day. It is the only one. And the reason that they decorate themselves in blackface right, is to then mock the idea of blackface that white folks were doing in the early 1900s, right? And they do not wear red lipstick. They wear white lipstick, or there's white to then denote that they are mocking white people. That is why, if you ever seen a Zulu, when they're painted, it's primarily black, and then you'll see white spots, so that it's communicating that they are actually, as black people, mimicking white folks who would dress up in blackface and not using the red lips, but using the white instead. So there's lots of cultural significance to that. And so for you to then go and tease Zulu, something I didn't know anything about, of course there is then this inflammatory behavior, because Zulu is taken very seriously. And let me also say this before you go on, Kaia. This to me is where we have to explore the tension of what it means to be African and being American. And what I mean by that is that Black folks had to create their own culture. And a part of creating their own culture, there are mixtures or infusions of Anglo-Saxon behavior, because we live in a country, right, settled and inhabited by Anglo-Saxons. However, the creation of that culture is not just blackness in tension with whiteness. It is also blackness and the messiness of Native Americans that were here previously. It is also the messiness of intermarriage that then deals with colorism and all these other things that exist in a way really only in an American phenomenon that does not necessarily identically represent itself other places in the diaspora. So I think that when we're talking about a slap in the face, I think that the slap in the face is really about this tension of what it means to have a culture. Because on one hand, somebody will say, well, you guys sue each other all the time. Yeah, but we're not suing each other over Essence Fest, right? There may be things that we sue each other over, but it's not going to be suing each other over the culture.
No, though I think, but as well, particularly when you're talking about that part of the country, there are a lot of people with skin like ours who don't identify as African at all, because they trace their lineage in Native American or in indigenous roots, and they are identified and recognized as such. So I mean, that's something to take into play. But particularly when you're talking about Zulu, there also is this we get into all these conversations with our Black international folk and what it means to be a part of the diaspora. So I want to say that when I go in, but part of this culture that you're talking about, or creating our own culture, I really believe that we pull from our wells of knowing without even knowing that we're pulling from our wells of knowing. But this idea of playing with the mockery of Black people while asserting power and agency is a dance that we have done. And the creation of the Zulu parade during a time where minstrel shows, what you're talking about, or minstrelsy, it still is the most popular culture in America. That's why every Halloween you see some stupid white person donning blackface. But it is the most popular pop culture coming out of America. This is the way how we like negotiate around. So like our tradition is, we might play in your face, yes, sir, massa, but trust, we have a machete in our back. Right. So that is who we are. But, if you are front facing and this is all you see is the or whatever it is, you think, that we are ignorant or that we're dumb and that we don't know, what we're doing. And so it's extremely dismissive. I think overall, one of the things on that note, this tension that you're talking about, to be African and to be American, is part of this thing, because I wrote it down. The new version of Essence Festival was trying to promote diaspora, when the original Essence Festival is Black American culture, and particularly Black American culture rooted in indigenous culture of the South. And so it's like, you can't take that. You can't have Black Indians at the Essence Fest and you calling it the Jollof and Jambalaya wars or whatever it is they were trying to do. Like rice, first of all, rice was a huge cash crop in Louisiana. and you're going to bring jollof rice wars, and you're not going to acknowledge the cash crop other than sugar that is building up the very site where your motherfucking ass is in, and being able to have this fucking festival and be with your dual citizenship passport, right? Like, we afforded that opportunity, and it's just not acknowledged. And I think at this point, because my parents are from the 60s, they went to school in the 60s at Southern University. And in the 60s is when you start seeing Africans are starting to come into America, and most of them are going to HBCUs because the white institutions are now allowing that. And I know the stories that my parents talk about, how when they're engaging these Africans, we're coming with this Pan-African mindset. We are all African, we're all Black. And these Africans are like, first of all, I'm not African. I'm Igbo, I'm Yoruba, I'm a Khan, I'm Ashanti, and we definitely not related, because I am of a high class in Africa and you are of a slave class. And I think as well, there is this idea about what a slave and a slave caste is that still reverberates strongly when Africans engage with Black folk in the US. So I don't know what the Essence Fest is going to look like, if it's going to look like anything, but I definitely think that in order for it to move on, in my opinion, there's going to have to be a change of ownership. Straight up. That's my opinion. Okay. I guess we finished on that one. All right. So anyway, okay. I'm very particular because, my mom is from Sherise and I have roots in Louisiana. So I'm very particular about when it comes to Louisiana. And I got to get that person who was mocking the Zulu parade, because, she died right before Mardi Gras. It was a young sister too. And so people are like, one thing you gonna fuck around and find out about is if you mess with people who know their roots. Okay. All right. Okay. As my mama said, y'all might got voodoo, but we got hoodoo and juju. All right. So, that's so Essence Festival. Last thoughts on the Essence Festival, I should just say.
One thing I want to say, and this may be controversial, but this is why secession in Black organizations is important. Because I believe that had there been a real secession plan, because Susan Taylor is what, 81 or 82 years old. She's older. So it was time for her to pass the torch, and it was time for her to bow out. But I believe that this is why it's important in Black organizations to have secession plans, because without secession plans, then we open ourselves up to co-optation.
Dang.
You listening? All right. Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. So I said, yes, we need a secession. Do you hear that, Maxine Waters? We need a plan of secession. That's all. That's all.
My takeaway, honestly, as well as is that, Sherise, you mentioned how the new mayor, which is Latina, Helena Moreno, is coming into place. I worry that there might be, so this is what happens a lot when you have Black spaces or Black communities that have created, political power, cultural spaces. At a point where we get weakened, there are other groups that come and take it over, and then it becomes something else. So I'm wondering I don't know why the mayor is not being supportive, or at least stepping in and saying that this is not only good for the city culturally, but also economically. But I just, wonder if there is another agenda to replace anything Black altogether at this time of the year. But definitely time will tell. I think this is also indicative of how, when you go to New Orleans and you talk to somebody who was in New Orleans before Katrina and they know about Katrina, they talk about a pre-Katrina and after the hurricane, Katrina. New Orleans still has not been made whole since that major catastrophe. It's still digging itself out. And I think maybe the average, or the median salary is something like $40,000 to $50,000. And New Orleans is very expensive. city. I know when I go, it's very expensive. So I don't know what this rupture in the Essence Festival, in the economy, that it will have, but we definitely have to take a look. And for those of you who are part of the Louisiana diaspora, I think it's important for y'all to take a gander and maybe put your foot in, because I think that is what we as children of migrants who left are now doing. We do need to go back to the birthplaces of our forebears, our parents and our grandparents, and really be, I think, an active part of what's going on there, even if it's just financially. That's my take.